Acts chapter 10 verses 34 to 43. God anointed him with the Holy Spirit. Peter proceeded to speak to those gathered in the house of Cornelius, saying, "In truth, I see that God shows no partiality. Rather, in every nation whoever fears him and acts uprightly is acceptable to him. You know the word that he sent to the Israelites as he proclaimed peace through Jesus Christ, who is Lord of all, what has happened all over Judea, beginning in Galilee after the baptism that John preached, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and power. He went about doing good and healing all those oppressed by the devil, for God was with him." Caesarea is on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, about 32 miles north of Joppa, which is the location of Peter's vision. Acts chapter 10 verses 10 to 15, he, Peter, was hungry and wished to eat, and while they were making preparations he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something resembling a large sheet coming down, lowered to the ground by its four corners. In it were all the earth's four-legged animals and reptiles and the birds of the sky. A voice said to him, "Get up, Peter. Slaughter and eat." But Peter said, "Certainly not, sir. For never have I eaten anything profane and unclean, unclean." The voice spoke to him again, a second time, "What God has made clean, you are not to call profane." Why do you suppose Luke wrote about this vision? To a Jew, such as Peter, there were certain animals that were ritually unclean and thus could not be consumed. God was showing Peter that everything and everyone he could was clean and acceptable to him. This was an important lesson taught just in time. Little did Peter know that the very next day Cornelius, a Gentile, would send some of his Gentile men to Joppa to ask Peter to not only visit him in his home but to eat and stay overnight with him. Had Peter not had the heavenly vision, he would have refused Cornelius's invitation because a devout Jew would have nothing to do with a Gentile. After Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven, the biggest problem that faced the growth of the church were the conflicts that existed between the Gentiles and Jews. Jesus' ministry was focused on the Jewish community, to be certain he reached out to the Gentiles, but the Jews were his primary focus. This reading is a speech given by Peter, the leader of the church, to Cornelius and his family at their home in Caesarea. Cornelius was important, and in charge of 100 soldiers, thus he was a Roman centurion. It is reported in Acts 10 that he was a devout man, who believed in the God of Israel, and had been visited by an angel who instructed him, "Send men to Joppa and bring one Simon who is called Peter, he is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside." Why is it mentioned that Peter was staying with Simon the tanner? We don't know for sure, but there are possibly two reasons. First, God already begun to prepare Peter to work with those outside the Orthodox Jewish community. You see, tanners were considered unclean because they worked with dead animal hides. Secondly, it is possible that on his own, Peter had begun the process of evangelizing those who lived on the fringes of Jewish society. However, a visit with Cornelius, a Gentile, would be unthinkable for a devout Jew, but God had other plans. Acts 10 verses 34 and 35, "And Peter opened his mouth and said, Truly I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." By saying these words, Peter shows his acceptance of Gentiles, which will result in the baptism of all the men, women, children, and infants in Cornelius's household, and the welcoming of Gentiles into the church. We should not allow any form of discrimination to keep us from telling others about Christ. The self-righteous scream judgments against to hide the noise of skeletons dancing in their own closets. John Mark Green.